Well, welcome along to the continuation of Landlord 2020 Vision campaign, taking place here on Property Tribes throughout January. And the whole point of this campaign is to give landlords practical solutions that they can put into practice throughout the year to make sure that they're very focused, that they have a clear way forwards. And I'm at the Property Investor Show, and join me on the stand of Elite Investor Club, and I'm joined by investment commentator Rowan, who has been a really popular contributor here at Property Tribes. And Graham, what do you think of the whole idea of our campaign of kind of Landlord 2020 Vision? Is it going to be important in the new year?
Oh, I think so. I think this is a crunch year, really, for landlords. You know, we've seen so many changes in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, I've counted at least 25, and very few of them are positive. So I think it's a time when we're somewhat under attack, and I think we have to have some really crystal clear rules on what we're going to do in our portfolio. And I've devised what I call a stress test. You may be familiar with the stress tests the banks have to go through to make sure they have enough capital to survive the next financial crisis. Well, I've come up with what I call the 2020 stress test for landlords, which is really 3 simple questions to ask yourself about each property in your portfolio to help you decide, basically, does it stay or does it go? So the first thing I think we have to assume is that there's going to be some sort of change to assured short-hold tenancies. They're going to extend to at least 3 years, maybe indefinitely. So the first question is, for each property, would you be happy with that tenant staying in there indefinitely? Yeah, so it could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Would you be happy with them staying there? The second thing I think we have to recognize is there's going to be some form of rent control. Whether that's a specific amount, whether it's a percentage, I suspect it might be linked to, say, CPI, the government's inflation figure. So assume going forward you're only going to be able to increase your rent by 1.8, 2.2% a year, whatever CPI is. But then the third thing I think we have to assume is, you know, being a landlord now, it's a political football. They're going to invent some new charges or taxes or costs. So I think you have to factor in a number, whether it's 15, 20, 25% increase in your costs to just accommodate whatever these new things are they dream up. So put a spreadsheet together, you know, put a value on that tenant, put a value on the rent increase, allow for those increased costs, and then say to yourself, given all of that, do I want to keep this property in my portfolio? If the answer is yes, great, it just stays as it is. If the answer is no, the next question is, what price do I realistically think I could get for it in this market, and can I live with that? Am I comfortable with that? So, because you might decide if you had to take a big hit on the price, you would then revisit your decision as to whether you keep the property or not. So if you do a simple stress test like that on each individual property, then you can arrive at whether you think it should stay or whether it should go. And it's a little kind of a tool you can use in a practical sense now that we're in 2020 to say, this is right for my portfolio, or maybe it no longer is and I need to do something about it.
I love the simplicity of that, Graham, because as you said, it's 3 simple questions that you can easily find the answer to. I think what is very important about what you've said as well is it strips away the emotion.
Yes.
And I have to confess that, you know, I feel an emotional attachment to our portfolio and our properties because I know what it took to acquire them and to you know, survive through very challenging times in the, you know, late 2008 period. So for me, thinking about selling is very hard.
Yes.
And I feel that emotional tug. What you've suggested is just to be very pragmatic, very analytical, let the numbers help you decide. And really, there's no point in hanging on to an asset if it's going to financially crucify you.
No, I mean, I think the only slightly emotional aspect might be how you score your view on the tenant, because obviously, you know, some tenants are better than others, so there's an element of softer judgment there, but the rest of it, I think, is just simply saying, have I got enough margin in this property to cope with these restrictions? And so the more Obviously, the higher geared you are, that's going to be a challenge. You know, the more restricted you are in your current rent, whether you've got a nice margin or not. You know, these are things, a lot of these times, these are historic things. Because don't forget, one of the underlying things here is a lot of landlords I speak to, they almost ignore the yield and the cash flow going for capital gain. Well, in this market, you're not going to see much of that. The only way I can see is what I call forced capital gain through development, like change of use, extension or whatever. If you're relying on a 2-bed flat in the south of England going up in value with the market, that's not going to be a great strategy now that we're in the 2020s. So you have to get a little bit, you know, hard on this. You have to use the numbers to drive it. And the other thing is a timing thing, because I think a lot of landlords are going to be thinking about selling. The smart money, in some cases, has already started. So if you think you might want to sell, sooner might be better than later.
And we've got the full kind of deployment of Section 24 coming in now in 2020, the final you know, phase of implementation as well. So there's possibly going to be some pain there as well. And you know, I think your strategy is also very good for uncertain times, because again, it's just going back to basic numbers, and those are things that we can actually deal with, because the things that may happen, you can't base decisions on what might never happen, but you can look at what you've got and stress test it, as you said. And I just love that you've come up with this 2020 stress test that fits really nicely into our campaign.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's something I think you should do in 2021 as well, you know, because make it an annual process. It's probably only 20 minutes per property, and so why not do it every year and just be on top of it and make fresh decisions based on current events.
Very, very good advice as always. And yes, I think Graham's absolutely right. This is such a good thing to do. Not too busy in the first week of January. Sit down with a cup of tea and do this little stress test that Graham suggested. Graham, as always, fantastic to have your contributions here at Property Tribes. Very happy New Year to you and everybody at the Elite Investor Club, and I hope we'll catch up with you again later in the year.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Vanessa.
Thank you.